Let me pose a question to you right off the bat. How frequently do you witness a person dedicate years to proclaiming something as their personal truth to the entire world, only for that very truth to swing back around and publicly dismantle them in front of everyone? That's precisely the situation Prince Harry has just found himself in. What makes this particular episode feel so jarring isn't any brilliant move by the press. Rather, it's because Harry essentially handed the destruction to himself right there in open court, swearing under oath, with his own statements serving as the damning proof. Prince Harry stepped into the courtroom in London carrying an air of assurance, perhaps even a touch of arrogance, as though this was finally going to be the occasion when he turned the tables and embarrassed the British media the same way he feels they once embarrassed him. He viewed this legal action as his long-awaited chance for redemption, solid evidence that he had been correct from the start, and that the press had fabricated stories, sensationalized events, and misused their influence against him. Over many years, he has positioned himself as the quintessential target of tabloid viciousness, a person relentlessly pursued and deeply scarred by sensational headlines. Yet rather than emerging as a triumphant figure, he instead stumbled directly into one of the most humiliating courtroom setbacks any well-known individual could possibly face. The turning point felt almost dreamlike in its intensity. When Harry gave his testimony, he categorically rejected the idea that specific discussions had ever occurred, staring straight at the court and declaring with complete conviction that those exchanges simply never took place. The way he spoke conveyed absolute confidence, as if no one could possibly challenge his version. Then, in a measured and deliberate manner, the lawyers representing the Daily Mail pulled out a copy of Spare and started quoting sections directly from its pages. These weren't hearsay reports, stolen messages, or unnamed informants. They were Harry's personal statements released, revised, advertised, and distributed globally under his own name and authority. You could sense the atmosphere in the room shift dramatically, almost as though the air itself grew thinner. Here was the very same autobiography that Harry had enthusiastically presented as his unfiltered, genuine account. The book he had insisted underwent thorough fact-checking and remained completely truthful in every respect was now being wielded to demonstrate that he was offering one narrative on the witness stand and an entirely different one when it came to generating income. Observing a person grasp, right there in the moment, that their own multi-million-dollar publication has transformed into a tool used against them in court is an uncommon sight. It represented a classic case of damage caused entirely by one's own actions. The irony only deepened the sting. For months, Harry traveled the world promoting Spare, repeatedly assuring audiences that it stood as the single most honest portrayal of life inside the royal family ever put into print. Time and again, he assured interviewers that he fully endorsed every single sentence, that he hadn't inflated anything, and that the contents truly captured his lived experience. Yet those identical sentences were now being introduced as proof that his sworn statements couldn't be relied upon. If the memoir truly reflected reality, then what he said in court did not. Conversely, if his courtroom testimony held up, then the book fell short of truth. No matter which angle you took, the damage to his trustworthiness was profound and immediate. People present in the courtroom called that instant nothing short of disastrous. One observer remarked that Harry suddenly appeared like someone who had just discovered he had completely misread the rules of the contest he entered. Another pointed out that his visible surprise at the tactic suggested he truly never saw it coming, which might stand as the single most revealing aspect of the whole exchange. How could anyone walk into such an important legal fight without bracing for the most glaring inconsistency imaginable? Was there really no effort to compare his sworn evidence against the contents of his massively successful book? Or had Harry somehow overlooked the details he himself had written and published? And that was merely the start of the difficulties he faced. The litigation has already consumed an astonishing $40 million in legal expenses, a figure so enormous that the judge felt it necessary to deliver a direct caution to those bringing the claims. Even for someone of royal standing, for $40 million hardly qualifies as trivial cash. That amount could support major charitable initiatives or humanitarian efforts for years. Instead, it has been funneled into a legal campaign that now appears increasingly precarious and uncertain. The judge left no room for misunderstanding should the claimants fail. They might bear personal responsibility for a substantial share of those massive expenses. For Harry, that stern reminder arrived at an especially vulnerable moment. The Netflix agreement has fallen well short of the widespread influence and acclaim that company leaders had anticipated. The arrangement with Spotify ended in such spectacular fashion that it turned into a running joke across the entertainment world. Invitations to speak for pay have dried up considerably. The cushion of financial security he once counted on now seems far less substantial than before. People familiar with the case have noted that Harry seemed genuinely taken aback by the intensity and thorough preparation shown by the opposing side, almost as though he believed his position and background would automatically grant him greater advantage. Courtrooms, however, do not run on respect for titles or appeals to emotion. They rest entirely on facts and logical coherence. Unfortunately for him, he encountered serious challenges on both counts. The key issue hanging over everything at this point is whether his own statements from the witness box have effectively eliminated any realistic prospect of prevailing in the lawsuit. Trustworthiness forms the bedrock of any case like this. When that foundation crumbles, very little remains to hold things together. One particular inconsistency rose above all the rest in its impact. During questioning, Harry was asked about exchanges he had with his former girlfriend, Chelsea Davy, while they were traveling in Botswana. He strongly rejected the suggestion that certain intimate discussions had ever occurred, once more casting himself in the role of someone wronged by invented media stories. Then came the decisive strike from the defense. They turned to the corresponding sections in spare and recited Harry's own vivid accounts of precisely those interactions, written in his distinctive style, issued under his name and marketed internationally. Experts in legal matters quickly highlighted just how grave this development truly was. When a person's sworn evidence stands in direct opposition to their own previously published material, it generates a crisis of believability that is extraordinarily difficult, if not impossible, to overcome. This situation extends well beyond an innocent slip of memory. It prompts serious doubts concerning truthfulness, dependability, and underlying motives. A few people even quietly uttered a term that no one in court ever wants linked to their reputation: perjury. Providing false information while under oath carries heavy weight, and holding a royal title offers no shield from accountability. As though matters weren't already difficult enough, Harry's conduct while testifying only added fuel to the fire. On several occasions, the judge had to step in because he persisted in debating points rather than directly responding to the questions posed. He came across as confrontational, restless, and clearly annoyed, seemingly interpreting the process of cross-examination as a personal affront instead of a standard part of legal proceedings. At one stage, the judge plainly informed him that he was falling into a common trap many people in court fall into, namely arguing instead of following the required procedure. That exchange carried more significance than many people appreciate. Judges rarely issue corrections to witnesses, particularly those with prominent public profiles. Every time the bench intervenes, it serves as a warning that the individual is actively weakening their own position. Those watching described Harry as someone spoiling for confrontation, struggling to rein in his emotions whenever he faced pushback. That kind of attitude does not project the composure of a person confidently laying out facts. Instead, it suggests someone who feels trapped and defensive. Next arrived what should have been a sympathetic highlight, yet it ultimately backfired even more severely. Harry grew visibly emotional and teary-eyed as he described the heavy price Meghan Markle had paid due to relentless media attention. At first glance, the display felt moving and deeply personal. However, the context made it puzzling. This particular lawsuit revolves around incidents that occurred long before he ever encountered Meghan. The emotional response surfaced during examination by his own legal counsel rather than under tough questioning from the other side, which immediately sparked skepticism among reporters and courtroom analysts. Quite a few observers characterized the display as carefully staged instead of genuinely arising in the moment. Emotional outbursts that emerge during supportive questioning, yet remain absent when real pressure arrives, tend to give the impression of orchestration rather than sincerity. In a judicial setting, that difference carries real weight. Judges and attorneys are skilled at spotting when feelings are being deployed tactically, and the general agreement among those present was that this particular instance caused more damage than benefit. The fundamental inconsistency running through Harry's entire position was impossible to overlook. He spoke with great passion about how newspapers had made money by exploiting his personal experiences, all while he himself sat atop a vast fortune accumulated by doing precisely the same thing. Spare brought in roughly $20 million on its own. Reports placed the value of his Netflix contract near $100 million. The Spotify arrangement contributed another $20 million or so. Additional earnings arrived through interviews, documentary projects, paid appearances, and more. No publication or outlet has capitalized on Harry's personal story with greater intensity than Harry has managed himself. One observer captured the situation perfectly, noting that Prince Harry has become the single most effective marketer of his own pain and difficulties. That observation struck a chord because it laid bare the central conflict in his position. It becomes difficult to argue that you have been victimized when you are actively constructing an international enterprise centered on recounting your experiences. You lose ground when you criticize others for intruding while simultaneously welcoming attention into your private world. The situation grew even more problematic when it emerged that Harry had actually permitted reporters from the exact publication he was suing to represent his interests at certain points during the proceedings. Put another way, he was prepared to rely on the press when it worked to his advantage, yet denounce them when their actions no longer served him. The opposing lawyers ensured that double standard remained front and center, and Harry's representatives struggled to offer any persuasive counterargument. Yet another key element of his case crumbled under examination. Harry has long maintained that the royal family blocked him from pursuing lawsuits against the media during the period when he still carried out official duties. That claim disintegrated the instant someone highlighted that Prince William had brought, and won, multiple legal actions against media organizations while continuing to perform his royal responsibilities. The example stood there plain and indisputable. This left Harry facing only two possible interpretations, and neither reflected well on him. One possibility was that he had not been truthful when describing barriers to legal action. The other was that he had been so detached from what was happening within his own family that he remained unaware his brother had already accomplished what he insisted could never be done. Either scenario dealt a serious blow to his reliability. Beyond the courtroom walls, the emotional landscape looked equally grim. According to people with knowledge of the situation, while Harry was in the United Kingdom, he kept checking repeatedly to learn whether his father or brother had attempted any form of contact. No such outreach occurred. Following years filled with public criticisms, published books, televised conversations, and documentary projects, the complete absence of response from his relatives spoke volumes. When he entered the court without any sign of royal backing and instead sat alongside well-known acquaintances from other circles, the sense of solitude became starkly evident. Certain commentators now argue that this legal effort was never solely directed at the press. They propose it may have represented an attempt to compel some form of acknowledgement or interaction from his family members, to engineer circumstances where they could no longer remain silent about him. If that truly formed part of the motivation, the strategy did not succeed. The quiet persisted, delivering an unmistakable message. From a monetary perspective, things are growing more precarious by the day. Should Harry come out on the losing end of this lawsuit, he might find himself personally responsible for costs amounting to tens of millions of pounds. With his entertainment contracts failing to meet expectations and support within the industry steadily eroding, maintaining his current way of living has turned into a genuine worry. Individuals working in Hollywood have observed increasing hesitation among potential backers to commit resources to additional projects involving the Sussexes, pointing to fatigue over ongoing controversies and uncertainty about financial payoff. What is unfolding now resembles less of a straightforward legal contest and more of a recurring cycle of self-sabotage. The book that severed important connections, the public discussions that widened existing family divisions, the testimony that demolished personal trustworthiness, each decision appears to intensify the harm rather than mend it. This particular setback does not stand alone. It aligns seamlessly with the larger narrative surrounding a man who began with extraordinary advantages, widespread public compassion, and virtually unlimited possibilities, yet consistently chose paths that restricted his future instead of broadening it. The real question at this stage is whether any meaningful comeback remains feasible, or whether this courtroom experience will ultimately be recalled as the decisive turning point from which there was no return. So consider this for a moment. Is it possible for Prince Harry to restore belief in his honesty after his own published book directly contradicted his statements given under oath? Can he shore up his financial position as legal expenses continue to climb and professional opportunities diminish? Can the bonds with his family endure following prolonged public criticism and exposure? Or are we simply witnessing the concluding stages in the decline of a prince who once possessed so much, only to gradually surrender it all through his own decisions?